Hello, everybody. Welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you today on WJOPLP Newburyport at FM 96.3 on Channel 9 and on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen. I'm just delighted this morning to be able to welcome a special preview of a literary festival author, Dr. Karen Fine. The Newburyport Literary Festival takes place from April 28th to the 30th at venues throughout the city. Dr. Fine's book is called The Other Family Doctor. A veterinarian explores what animals can teach us about love, life, and mortality, and indeed they do. Dr. Fine is an holistic veterinarian in central Massachusetts, where for 25 years she operated a house call practice. She's a certified veterinary acupuncture practitioner and a leading expert in the field of veterinary narrative medicine. In fact, she literally wrote the textbook on narrative veterinary medicine, and it's called Narrative Medicine in Veterinary Practice. She's also, not for nothing, an excellent storyteller with many wise observations to make about animals and their humans. She'll be appearing on Saturday, April 29th at 9 a.m. at the Old South Church in the Social Hall. First of all, Dr. Fine, Karen, welcome to the morning show, and thank you so much for taking time to be with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's totally my pleasure. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is you're very eloquent in your book about the strength of the human-animal bond. At one point, you used a phrase I connected with because it feels that way to me, transcendent love. And you say it's love fully realized. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think it is that makes our love for animals so expansive and so deep that it often makes me feel that we're better human beings because of the love we feel for them?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And to some extent, I feel like it's almost a mystical thing. Like we can try to describe it and say, that these ways, but it is, and those of you who've felt like this, I think you might feel like it's hard to put into words. And maybe sometimes stories are the best ways to understand what this bond can feel like in our lives. It's hard to explain. But transcendent, I just kind of like that word. And I think when I was using that, I was talking about, I've done a lot of euthanasia, seen and quality of life discussions, animals at the end of their lives. And it's this kind of, I feel like it's this fully realized love. Like when you first get an animal, you fall in love with them, but your adventures are only beginning. And then at the end of an animal's life, the love continues. It's almost like you're changing phases. Your story still exists and the love doesn't die. And you remember them, you carry them with you. But it's this kind of it's the end of part of a story. So that whole, sort of fully realized, I feel really is very, it's just a sort of a wonderful thing to see at the end of an animal's life, because it's this, all the journeys and connections. But just to go back to what you said about, why is it transcendent love? I think one of the things is that we don't feel shame in front of our animals, and that's such a sort of toxic human emotion that we can feel shame in front of pretty much any human potentially. It could be our parents, our children, our friends, our coworkers, ourselves. We feel we feel like maybe we're being judged or we're judging ourselves or something. And animals don't judge us, or they don't judge, they judge you, they look at you like it's supper time.
Which is a different phenomenon.
Right. Or, did you mean to stop patting me? Because you just stopped patting me and I see that your hand is there. That kind of thing. But they're not judging us for who we are. They fully accept us for who we are in a kind of a way that it's difficult to get from humans.
Yes.
They're not children, so, and children go through all these phases. So, you do have, them fully dependent on you and
Yeah.
perhaps some of that really close love when they're young. But then you're raising children to leave the nest and be independent, and it's a whole different relationship. So there's some similarities, I feel like, with with children and animals, but it's certainly not the same. And I think because it's not the same, and we're not raising them to sort of continue on and be independent, it allows for a different kind of love and bonding.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's so well put, fully realized. It's like a part of our potential to be the best person that we can. I feel like animals can bring out of us. So I really like that phrase. And you were very eloquent about that connection. Thank you very much. And I know you talk about the end of life care. And one of the things we're all very grateful to veterinarians for is being able to prevent an animal from needless suffering at the end of their lives. And I know one of the things you talk about in your book, and I know I've felt it, and I know many people who have felt it, is that it's in many ways a grittier loss than people in our lives, whom we may doesn't mean we don't love the people, but there's something about, I mean, I think about it sometimes. I think I can't think of any human being, no matter how much I love them, I would want to be with all day and all night. Whereas it's easy to be with my dog, because
Absolutely.
I think you tagged it. There's no shame, there's no humiliation with the dog. There's just love. They may have expectations, but that different from judgment.
Right. That's different from judgment. Exactly.
It is. And a lot of those expectations are the ones that we've given them. So
Right. They know, and that's another thing I think that is so important, that they weave themselves into our routines. It's like this dance every day, and so many people say to me, well, it can be sort of like, okay, they're not themselves, something's wrong. This is how I knew something was wrong. Well, they're always right at the bathroom door when I come out of the shower, and now she's not there. Something like that. You have these little rituals that you do with them that are silly. Maybe like you sing a little song to them as you get their food ready, or something like that. You call them a funny name, or they're right there at your feet, or whatever it is. But it's like this daily thing that's part of your life and sort of anchors you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Well, and that's one of the delights of your book, is that there are a lot of those stories in there that everyone will identify with about your relationship with the animals in your life. Well, Karen, I wanted to ask you, you're a holistic veterinarian. I mean, you utilize Western approaches for diagnosis and treatment, but you also, you're trained in acupuncture, and you also talk about Chinese herbs that you use with some of your own pets in the book. And so I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about how these different approaches in your experience complement one another, and perhaps give us an example.
Sure. So I was so excited when I first learned about acupuncture, which was in 2000, because there are some patients that I see that Western medicine just doesn't have a lot of options. And fortunately, Chinese medicine has options for some of these animals. And some of these things are chronic conditions that, we sort of have long-term medications, but those have potential side effects. So, that's something where you can say, well, can we do anything with acupuncture, with Chinese medicine? And certainly it's not a panacea. There are definitely things that it doesn't help. But there's been enough veterinarians doing acupuncture, and I've done it for long enough too, that, you kind of know what is likely to help and what is not likely to help. For instance, like older dogs with arthritis, a lot of my acupuncture patients are older animals, and so a lot of them have arthritis, especially big dogs like labs. They tend to have arthritis as they get older. Acupuncture can really help. And it can help. So sometimes we don't need to use pain meds as much. We also use it in conjunction with pain meds, but some of my patients might be animals that maybe their liver blood work values are elevated, so it's more risky to use some of these pain meds. So we'll use acupuncture, but I certainly have animals on, Western medicine and acupuncture. But geriatric animals, I think, really benefit from acupuncture because they tend to have multiple issues, and you can address multiple things at the same time with acupuncture, and there really aren't any side effects, so every once in a while there'll be a dog or a cat that is very sensitive to acupuncture, so I can only use maybe a few needles. I'll use fewer needles. Otherwise, they tend to get very sleepy. But other than that, there's really no downside.
Yeah, well, I can testify to the benefits of acupuncture for a geriatric Labrador Retriever because 2 labs ago, my dog had, I know, well, we endure.
I know. Yeah, two
But
laps ago.
she had arthritis, as so many older, especially larger dogs do. And I will confess to you that I was very skeptical in the beginning about acupuncture for my dog.
Mhm,
But we went, and it took a certain number of sessions to build up the chi.
mhm,
But it was really transformative for her. So I mean, it just made all the difference in the world for her, and I think it probably extended her life. But it certainly meant that her remaining year and a half to 2 years were pretty much pain free. So I'm a total believer. But
yeah,
I
yeah.
I understand what you're saying is it's individual animal specific. Um, Depending upon, if it's a chronic condition, if it's an older dog, and whether other things just aren't working, and
Mhm.
how wonderful that you have a toolbox that's as expansive and
Exactly.
synthetic. So, well, the other approach to veterinary medicine that I was unaware of was narrative veterinary medicine, which you describe in your book, and have written a textbook about. So I was hoping that you could tell us, what is narrative veterinary medicine? How does it help you with diagnosis? And perhaps you could illustrate it with an example.
Sure, sure. So narrative medicine is pretty new even in human medicine. It started probably 25 to 30 years ago. And it's sort of going back to the best part of old style medicine, which is when you really knew the patient.
Mhm.
And I talk about my grandfather in the memoir, and my grandfather was a physician who did house calls. So he really knew his patients, even if they came to the office. He knew kind of their lifestyle, how they lived. He knew how many people were in the family, in the home, all these sort of things, and sort of whether their lifestyle is chaotic or very ordered. If you give somebody instructions, this is how I want you to, what I want you to do to help this condition. Are they likely to follow those instructions?
Yeah.
And that's something very important to know as a practitioner. Some people come in with their animals and they have lists of questions and they have charts. And, like say an animal has had seizures, they've got a whole list of them. So some people are one extreme and some people are not like that. So narrative medicine helps because you're really looking at the individual. And in terms of veterinary medicine, you're looking at the family, the caretaker, the household, that kind of thing. And one story I can think of is a dog that the people had brought in to see me because the dog had a very aggressive type of cancer that had been diagnosed by another veterinarian. So they were coming to see me just for a holistic consult. And they didn't have a lot of money, but they wanted to see if there was anything I could do. And there was a couple, and they had a couple of kids, and a young couple. And the man was very angry. He was very sort of angry at the other veterinarian. He was angry about the dog's diagnosis. He said, I don't understand how she can have a tumor in her bone. Why can't they just remove the tumor? And, I explained to him that you can't just take out a piece of bone. You have to take the whole leg because that's what had been discussed. The dog had bone cancer. And it was almost so, I almost thought about having someone in the room with me, even though we were just having a discussion, because he was so angry. I felt
Yeah.
like he was sort of volatile. And I was a little worried, if he sort of escalated his anger. He
Yeah.
was looking at me, and I was trying to kind of I kind of needed to get the story. I needed to, I was talking to him about the dog, and then I asked a question that I often ask at holistic consults. It's sort of a longer appointment. I said, have you had her, the dog, since she was a puppy? And the woman who was nicely conversing with me, she was fine. She said, he has. She kind of tilted her head
Oh.
towards him and she said, he has. And I just kind of went, Oh,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
okay. So, and they were young, so I thought, okay, so this dog has been with him through all these transitions. He met this woman, he's got
Hmm.
kids now, and it made me think of my first dog, Trudy, and how she was with me through all these transitions.
Hmm.
And it sort of helped me as a practitioner because I was having a hard time connecting with him.
Yeah.
So not only did I understand the story here, of what she meant to him. Of course, he loved his animal,
Yeah.
but understanding that sort of connection, and I also felt more sympath. I mean, I felt sympathetic
Yeah.
anyways. Here was this wonderful dog, and
Yeah.
she was like not very old. She was probably 7. She had a
Mm.
terrible disease. They were going to lose this dog shortly.
Yeah.
We couldn't really do, anyways. So that's what the narrative medicine, once I had a handle on the story, I was sort of able to talk to him, and I kind of got on his level. And I also, sort of understood his anger a little bit more. He was very angry at the situation. And I
Yeah.
just said, you know what? I wish there was more we could do. They didn't have a lot of money anyways. I sort of gave him, I sent them home with some supplements, but I said, ultimately, I think this is, it's unfortunately a very bad disease. But I said, it's really unfair. And I think that's kind of where he was coming from. I said, it is not fair. She's a
Yeah.
young dog. She's a wonderful dog. She does not deserve this. And,
Yeah.
he was much calmer when he left. And when they left, and I felt like I did as well as I could. But until I sort of got the story,
Yeah.
and then the other thing, a lot of times when I just come in the room and here's a sick animal with a person, one of the things I say is, when did you notice a problem? Because it's
Yeah.
not just a timeline thing. I want to know the story. And a lot of times it's like, well, it was right after the holiday and, I was doing this and then I turned around and I saw all this vomit and, whatever. I want a story because I get a
Yeah.
lot more information from a story than I do from, a list of questions.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, it's really interesting, and that's a very touching story. I have a friend who's a veterinarian. She always says that, to help the animal, you really have to understand and help the people. And I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think the validation of you're talking about, yeah, this is really hard, and no, it's not fair. It sounds like it just helped him settle down. So behind a symptom, there's a story, in other words, and you
Yeah,
won't
I love
fully,
that.
you
Behind a
won't
symptom, there's a story. Absolutely.
and behind the story there's probably a backstory. So you won't be able to fully understand, I guess, totally what the symptom means for the animal and certainly for the people unless you spend the time. And that's what stands out to me, that the kind of practice that you perform and the holistic approach means spending time with people and actually listening, which sounds like it's really key to being effective. So thank you for that. It
Yeah.
was really interesting. Something else that you talk about in your book that I was not familiar with, but it sounds like a wonderful idea. I was hoping you could just sketch out a bit for us about what the One Health Initiative is, what it is, and why its sort of synthetic approach to health is important.
Yes. Yes, very much so. And it's not something I'm, involved in a, sort of level of, I'm not on any boards or panels or anything like that. But it's basically this initiative that considers that the health of people, animals, and the planet are intertwined.
Mm.
And, what affects one affects the others, and that we really have to look at all these things to think about, not just like human health. We have to think about it in context, and certainly with the pandemic, with animals, and not just the pandemic, Ebola. There's many zoonotic diseases that go from human to animal, animal to human. Rabies is something we're, as veterinarians, always very mindful of. But not just that, sort of the whole health aspect of how important it is, and environment, and how important someone's environment is to their health and their animal. And there's also this idea that animals can be sort of sentinels sometimes for people, and that's getting a little bit more research, I think, certain topics, like for instance thyroid disease. And sometimes I tend to see, and I think a lot of veterinarians see, a lot of animals have the same similar medical issues as the humans they live with. And
Mm.
that's a very interesting thing.
Yeah.
Is it a
Yeah.
microbiome issue? Is it something in in their household, in their lifestyle? And it's not something that physicians would probably notice because
Right.
people aren't going to say, oh, okay, I have a thyroid problem. Well, my dog has a thyroid problem too. They're
Right.
probably not going to say that to their
Right.
physician.
Right.
But, people say it a lot to the
I'll
veterinarian.
bet.
Oh, I have a thyroid problem too. It's funny
Yeah.
that Fluffy does. So we hear
Yeah.
that kind of stuff a
Yeah.
lot.
That sounds like a very rich area for research and better understanding, because we certainly live in an interdependent world, and yet our knowledge is often siloed. And so I think that my friend who's a veterinarian will often say she thinks that human doctors could learn a lot from veterinarians, and I'm sure she's right. So, well, one of the things, speaking of veterinarians, that I wanted to talk to you about, because this was also something that I learned from your book that I wasn't aware of, are the vulnerabilities of veterinarians. I did not know that veterinarians have a higher risk of suicide than the general population, more than physicians or dentists. And how do you understand, Karen, the sources of this vulnerability for veterinarians?
Yeah, it's difficult. And it's not like, there's a bunch of theories. It's not like we know for sure, but it is very difficult work. And I think it's not really recognized for being that difficult. And part of it is the veterinary sort of, and, for me, and I went to school many years ago, but this started in veterinary school. We're sort of trained to be very stoic and trained to sort of just step up and do what has to be done. And you don't say something like, yeah, I think that's too much for me. I don't think I can
Yeah.
do this. I better, we're starting to do more of it now. There's more awareness of it, but, it's definitely sort of, it's hard to say no. And
Yeah.
veterinarians, you're taking care of animals. The animals need care. So, you may be like, okay, this person, I'm not really, the person's worried, but you're upset about that, but you're also upset that this animal's in need.
Yeah.
So that's a very difficult thing. So you sort of give and you give. You're also very close to a lot of very intense emotions.
Mhm.
And that can be challenging. Sometimes I have a hard time at the end of the day separating myself
Yeah.
from these difficult emotions that, I see people on some of the worst days of their lives.
Yeah.
And it's very, very difficult. And also veterinarians, they're sort of known to be perfectionists.
Mhm.
So that is difficult too, which goes along with the not saying no. I have to do everything and I have to do it perfectly. And I think there's been a lot of talk about wellness in the profession, which means, make sure to get enough sleep and eat right and take care of yourself and exercise. But there's been some criticism of that as well, because that can also blame the individual in terms of like, well, if you're feeling stressed, it must be that you're not taking care of yourself. So that's
Oh,
too. And certainly if you are feeling depressed, overwhelmed, it's difficult to take care of yourself.
it is. Yeah.
And I think there's just I think really my feeling is that there's got to be more recognition of how difficult this is. And I think that was one of the things I hope to address in the book, that I want the general public to understand. And sometimes people give us bad reviews online and people take out their frustrations on us and the staff. Sometimes the
Yeah.
receptionist hear these things like, one receptionist, she said to me, this person just told me, well, you must not care about animals at all.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Oh,
And then that's also why vet clinics are short staffed. It's not just the veterinarians who are burning
yeah.
out. A receptionist, can say, you know what, I'm going to go be a receptionist somewhere else where I
Yeah.
don't
Or you don't have to put up with the,
have to
yeah.
put up with this.
Yeah.
And also salaries are very low,
Yes.
especially compared to the enormous debt that
Yeah.
many new graduates
Yeah.
have. It's a huge burden.
Yeah.
So we're not really well financially compensated. So
Yeah.
all of this can kind of end up there. You feel like you're failing, and then you worry. Our patients don't live very long, and they get very sick, and we don't always have the extensive tests available or that people can pay for that in human medicine. So, you're dealing with a lot of emotions and a lot of things. And could I have saved this animal? What could I have done? It's very challenging work. And I don't think I really realized it myself.
Yeah.
Until I heard that statistic about the veterinarians with the increased risk of suicide.
Yeah, I was, it was a revelation to me when I read that in your book, because I think you're right. I think a lot of people don't understand the demands of the profession, and they do expect you all to be angelic, and you often are, and yet there are enormous challenges, just enormous as you've described. And I think a lot of people don't realize that it's not you don't make the same kind of money that human doctors do. And yet it's more competitive to get into veterinary school, and you also have huge student loans. So it was a revelation to me. And thank you for explaining that. I think it's important for all of us who care about animals to understand the challenge and the demands that are being made on the doctors that we depend upon. Well, the other family doctor, right? Whom we need at some of the most emotionally challenging times of our lives. So thank you for that explanation. Well, it's been so wonderful to talk to you. I've learned so much. I thoroughly enjoyed your book. One of the great things about your book, Karen, is that you also include a lot of resources in your book. And I was hoping that you could just describe some of the resources that you include that people can find in the appendices to
Sure.
the other family doctor.
Sure, they're mainly about pet loss. That's what they're sort of focused on. And I also have a guide to writing an obituary.
Yes.
And that is something that I have found very helpful. And that's why I wrote it out as a whole guide. People think, well, how do I start? What do I do? Here's a whole guide that kind of, lays it out for you. And also some other rituals, which I think are very helpful. And then I've got other resources in terms of how to find a holistic veterinarian, what to do if you're thinking about getting a puppy and you want to avoid getting a puppy from a puppy mill, which is something I talk about in the book as well. So
yes, and I would add, I didn't realize that there were online puppy mills, and everybody should read what's in your book about what to look out for in online puppy mills. This is not the same as the rescue sites like Pet Finder or those things, but these are organizations that appear online, and they can appear to be one thing and they're really not. They're basically puppy mills. So it's really important to bring that awareness to the general public. So I appreciated your doing that in your book, Karen.
thank you.
Well, everybody, the good news is that you can go see Karen at the Newburyport Literary Festival. Her presentation, again, will be Saturday, April 29th at 9 a.m. at the Old South Church in the Social Hall. She'll be talking about her book, but you can find information about her presentation, which will be called Fur, Feathers, and Scales, A Lifetime of Caring for Pets. And you can find more information at the Newburyport Literary Festival site, which is easy to remember. It's newburyportliteraryfestival.org. And Karen's website is also easy to remember. It's karenfinedvm.com. Karen, I can't thank you enough for writing the book, for doing the work you do, for taking time to visit the morning show and to give us a preview of your book and your appearance at the Newburyport Literary Festival. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it's been totally my pleasure, Karen. Thank you very much. That's it for today, everybody. Please join us again next Thursday at 9 for the morning show. And in the meantime, be well and thank your veterinarian, everybody. All right. Take care. Thanks, Karen.